Morning, everyone, and welcome. We're going to begin right on time because we are beginning, as you know, CTM is going to be streaming this. And so welcome to all of you here. And we're just going to have a couple of minutes delay because we're waiting for one more of the panelists, Maureen Brummett, who I know you understand. The traffic and the weather is horrific. So maybe you want to get some refreshments. I don't even want to introduce everybody because I want Maureen to hear the introductions as well. All right. Sounds good. Yeah. So please get some refreshments. It's a homemade quiche and a homemade coffee cake there. So
nice. Lisa, what can I get you?
Quiche sounds wonderful. I apologize for not being there in person. I was about to leave my house in the storm.
I know. I wish you were here, Lisa. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you recovering, Fran?
I'm doing very well. 6 weeks and.
I'm happy to hear that.
What's that?
Flash flood from where?
Here, right here.
Right here.
As if we knew that.
I didn't know what was.
No, it follows your, it follows your cell phone.
I apologize, but I'm.
Oh, it's okay.
Be courteous.
Yes. No need to apologize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm wearing these things.
Ever, people need.
Yes, right.
Well, this is for my benefit, it's for your benefit.
Yeah,
A lot of people have this cold.
yeah, they do. My husband actually never stays home. It's okay.
But there's also a fair amount of flu stuff,
Yeah,
but not COVID.
yeah. Philip? You bring the art? They said there might even be.
Really?
I think they were talking about your presentation.
Yeah. Andy. We had a nice meeting with Julie.
Oh, good,
Yeah, so I think we're all planned
good.
for the presentation.
That's,
She's very, I hadn't met her before.
you had a better report?
No, never. She really is.
Yes. Yes, and she gets stuff done, and,
Yeah.
but, very sweet, right?
Good.
I've seen Sharon a bunch and it's nice to see new team members.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are, yeah.
Different departments, so.
Oh, that's
yeah,
great.
Kind of, you can go there.
Yeah, nice.
Part of it.
Yes.
There's still cool things, but every person that comes in is usually.
Oh, I can imagine, yeah, it's great.
It's
It's good to hear.
Yeah.
How are you, Patrice?
Good.
So used to seeing people in boxes. It's very nice to be in person.
Hey, Sheila, I didn't really see you walk in.
How are you? She sort of floated it. She floated in.
Yeah. How are you feeling?
I'm doing much. Again, it's 6 weeks today. No, yes. It's today Tuesday? Yeah,
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Very long.
Yesterday, Tuesday, 6 weeks. So,
That's great.
yeah. They tell me I'm looking well. So
Good.
I'm
You're not
happy.
okay.
Hmm?
You're not
Not
okay.
no pain, but pain before this was, from April on was excruciating. So I tried everything not to do surgery.
I know.
Anything and everything. but,
Yeah.
At any rate. It's behind you. Yeah, it is behind me.
Morning, Brian.
Yeah.
Did you see that wonderful story in the Times today about the bar in Milwaukee?
No.
I can't imagine.
That-
We only had lunch. I can't imagine.
Just
talking
those-
about
Nice
something.
to join now, so great.
Bob gets injured, the
My
bills
God,
are
I'm wondering if we should just
everybody got
cancel
our
it.
$600 car bills.
Is this weather gonna be bad today?
I thought it was gonna be like this 36. And, no, two gyms.
So it's all great.
I mean,
I mean, I'm sure it's not gonna be.
yeah, I'm coaching
Well, subject.
soccer, so
That-
we were in the buses on Friday night. We were in the thunderstorm, against the game in the middle of it,
Really, after the first.
and it took us 45 minutes to get on the church.
Oh my
But it
God.
couldn't be.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. And if you've ever been on a bus with thunder and lightning right next to it, it shakes like, pretty scary.
Right, well, my husband
Right,
had to
right
to
here.
Ridgefield, Chester to Ridgefield,
Yeah.
and he was saying the same thing, he's like, the bus, that was.
So we actually had a,
The game and the play wasn't bad.
Well, we had to stop play, so we have to redo.
Yeah, I was-
They do the game tomorrow, and I think it's still gonna be. I'm not sure we're gonna get it.
Was the letter of the list?
Yeah, so around the, it was
Capability.
34, and then there was a number after it.
Yeah, not,
That's really.
the majority shower activity.
Yeah.
6 p.m.
Oh.
Not early.
Rotation,
Yeah.
Why would they want to?
Yeah. We're getting there.
So you know,
Anything else?
Fairfield County, right?
Yeah.
So I have a question. So I'm a regular on Melissa's check. It's called when you.
Yeah,
with Melissa or something.
We'll see, if we're taking a different approach with MTSS, it's the option. Yep.
My name is 705. Can you do
Is
that?
there,
Okay.
is there, YouTube or?
So she, we have a few different person. Do some radio.
Videos.
I'm gonna do the one on the health conditions in the school, lack of air conditioning and mold
Yeah,
issues.
I
She
can send
has
some.
also wants to know about bus
Yeah.
problems, school
I mean,
security,
I'll let people recall that. I don't want to sort of have my
the
colleagues.
buildings,
Yeah, sure.
how parents can get their kids to better communicate about things like bullying, weapons, social media.
Yeah.
You want to do that?
Sure. What is it though?
She'll tell you.
What
She'll
the
get in touch
first
with her.
Okay.
Can I give you?
Yeah,
this one?
yeah.
Thanks, Bethel.
Oh, yeah, we had a pretty good start.
I can ask that question to Liz. No, they- that's what
Sorry. We had a pretty good start to the school year.
Yep.
I mean, the, every year it seems to be, post-COVID seems to be getting a little calmer with staff and students, and I think this year is definitely a reflection of that. We have, we're okay with staffing, but we have some paraeducators. Yeah, us and everybody.
But there was a sort of mental change about how important school was.
Oh, yeah,
It's not gone away.
yeah, but it's better.
Huh?
I think it's better. Do you, I mean, staff?
No,
Or
no,
just
the
overall?
mental attitude that school is not obligatory.
Yes. Oh, definitely. Yeah, I think it's better. Like.
But it's segmented. I mean, it's a-
Yeah, yeah,
there's
Or
groups
move
that sort of.
that.
really-
right,
that, they define during COVID or whatever.
yeah.
Would it be good to talk about schools, bus problems? For the, this is Southern Fairfield County, for the, a radio spot, bus problems.
So hard. Another one,
Yeah.
big,
Yeah.
beyond anything.
And
Gives me like a little bit of PTSD.
it's also national.
It's not, it's so big, that's what I mean, it's way bigger than one quick
Do
thing.
you want somebody in their calendar in general?
What do you need, someone to interview
Yeah, probably in general,
about the bus?
about the bus, about having enough bus drivers and then the bus strikes and that kind of thing.
Then when you work with the bus.
I mean, I
Lori.
Good morning. Maureen, it's great to see you.
Last one, alert, by the way, everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, we can get started. Good morning, everyone, again, and thank you all for being here, those that are in person, those that are online, and all those that are also looking or listening to the task force from your homes or offices. So today is a very special day. We have a superintendent panel today to speak about issues in special education, how they would like to see the task force respond to special education. You know, we've said over and over again, this is not going to be just one more task force. This is going to be a task force that offers significant and realistic recommendations for the improvement of special ed. But before I introduce the task force members, I just would like to go around the table and on screen just to introduce the panel to our task force members and just say, you know, a brief introduction of who you are so they know who it is that they're speaking to. Okay, so I'm Fran Rabinowitz. I'm the executive director for the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents, former superintendent in Camden and Bridgeport, and former associate commissioner at the State Department.
Morning, Karen Glean, Director of the Newman School and representing Connecticut Association of Private Special Education.
Patrice McCarthy, Executive Director and General Counsel for the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education.
Sheila McKay from CAVE as well, interested bystander, not on CAVE. Stephanie Wanzer, I'm a special ed teacher for 18 through 22-year-olds at Arrest, and I am here for CEA.
I am Tara Purdy, I'm a parent, and I teach math at Fundos and Secretary of State.
Felicia Bowman, Associate Executive Director of the Connecticut Association School, formerly from Farmington.
Morning, Brian Klumpwitz, I'm the Special Education Division Director at the State Board of Education.
I am Andy Feinstein, I'm co-chair of this. I'm a lawyer in private practice and invest in Connecticut.
Jason.
Jason Adler. I am a high school, can you hear me?
Yes.
A high school counselor, as well as a Board of Ed member in Clinton, Connecticut. And I'm here on behalf of Connecticut AFT.
Thank you, Jason. Lisa?
Good morning, Lisa Hammersley, Executive Director of the Friends of a nonprofit that deals with community issues.
Tony?
Tony DiTrio, and I represent CASA.
Heather?
Hi, Heather Tartaglia, Chief Program Officer at CREC, and I represent the RESC Alliance.
Great. So welcome, everyone. I think I got everybody. We have Rosalie up there, who is our wonderful facilitator and works with the legislature and is you know, recording this, and we also have Dawn who takes minutes, etc. Okay, all right. So let me introduce this awesome panel. They're my friends and colleagues, and they work very closely with me at CAPS. But let me begin with Christine Carver. Christine is, well, I'm going to let them all introduce themselves.
So I'm currently the superintendent of Bethel Public Schools. I started my career as a special education teacher and did it for 12 years. I then progressed into be a supervisor of special education and then a director of special education. And I think most importantly, I'm also a parent of a child, well, an adult with a disability. So that was educated in the Connecticut public school system. So I have a son who's now 27, who has both an intellectual disability and autism. So I feel like I have a different perspective because I experienced it as a parent and I also experienced it as an educator. So that's my background.
Good morning. Sorry for my tardiness. The roads were horrendous. Maureen Brummett, Superintendent in Newington. I also have a special ed teaching background. I taught in Waterbury, upstate New York, Spokane, Washington, and California. So in various capacities, coaching and all of that. Then I ultimately went to Plainville, where I was a special ed supervisor and a director for 8 years. So I have a lot of experience that way. I also have a nephew who's now an adult with autism. So his trajectory is an important reminder for me about what both parents go through as well as professionals. And I look forward to the work of the committee.
Hi, everyone. Leslie Torres Rodriguez, Superintendent of Hartford Public Schools, and I actually have a social work background and also taught social and behavioral sciences at the local community college for 7 years. And so those two are a great mix into informing what I do every single day as a superintendent. And on a more personal level, both of my boys are neurodivergent young men. And so I also bring a different lens to the work. Glad to be here.
Thank you.
So I see this panel as the first of a number of panels that we'll have of various stakeholders of this process. We have an incredibly talented task force, but there are other ideas, other thoughts out there. We really ought to canvas them in order to produce some meaningful recommendations. So let me start off with the first question, which I think you've been given to all at least in advance. How do you think about special education? Is it just part of a continuum with regular education, or is it an entirely separate piece in your school system?
It is a continuum. However, sometimes it feels like, we're managing, right? You use the word beast. That's not necessarily the word that I want to use, but it feels undaunting at times. But it is part of a continuum of service, and we have to make sure that our multi-tiered system of support is clearly codified and that there are processes and structures so that we can be responsive based on data across the entire continuum.
I wouldn't call it a beast either, but I would say that it is part of a continuum. It is a very important part of any Board of Education programming. It's one of the bigger budget line items. So it's something that we pay a lot of attention to. And I think it's important that we do invest resources into special education so that our kids are well served. And, I'm sure we'll get into later about when the scale tips the other way about kids getting served. But overall, I think it's an important component for any school district to do well.
I don't think I have any even additional comments. I would not characterize it as a beast. I think that there are times when we have students that whether move into the district or create challenges economically. So that is something I think all districts experience. But I think that probably that the commitment to ensuring that students with disabilities are receiving a quality and free and appropriate public education is a major priority of our district.
Now, it's been said here that you can't have a good special ed program unless you have a good general education program.
I agree with that statement. Very true.
Well, what do you explain what that means?
I'll start. I think it starts with what we call tier 1 instruction, right? So what types of programs and services are we providing to children from age 3? And ensuring that we're meeting kids' needs and we have responses when kids aren't appropriately responding to intervention. So we have a good quality tier 1 instruction that in terms of all the core content areas and elective programs, but also what are the intervention or how are we responding to children's needs as they start to experience difficulties, whether it's academic, behavioral, neurotypical, like starting to see patterns where they may have challenges within the regular classroom, and what is the response to that? And then ultimately a referral system and child find practices that when necessary, kids are meeting, we're providing those services into special ed.
That's kind of an interesting case study. When I was in Plainville, State Department of Ed called me up and said, boy, your achievement gap between special ed and regular ed has diminished significantly. We're going to come over there and see what you're doing. And I thought, geez, what the heck did we do? When I reviewed the, what was happening, what actually did happen was tier one, I don't even know if they called it tier one at the time, had gotten way more consistent in the curriculum. And there was more predictability. And when you went from class A to class B in grade one, you saw very similar instruction, and that hadn't happened before. So I brought regular ed teachers and curriculum teachers to that meeting because it was really more a function of once tier one is stable and productive, your special ed needs become less intense.
Right. I think the only thing that I would add, and maybe it speaks to what you're talking about, is that it exists within a larger ecosystem of programming and operations. And so making sure that the structures, the processes, and then the elements of the instructional core, right, the curricula, the pedagogy, all of those things have to be true and implemented with fidelity.
You know, I'm so happy to hear you make the connection between tier one all the way up to special ed services, because my first meeting with the special ed task force, there were so many members of the task force that made that same point. So it's great to hear it from my colleagues who are so steeped in the work. So I appreciate that. As a former superintendent, I also know that the budgetary restraints are huge. As a matter of fact, around now, I used to start getting very uptight because it was time to start to prepare the budget for the following year. Can you talk about controlling spending, and are you able to do that control of spending in special ed?
I think you are, you know, even as a special ed director. And the way that you do it, in my opinion, is providing, and this is no offense to the private special ed facilities, that it's not meant to intend to do that. So please know as I say this, but it's to develop the capacity in district to meet kids' needs. And so ultimately, the quality of programming, it has to be there. Our parents will have an issue, right? But I think that everything from, you know, to Maureen's point about building up the capacity of your own staff. So like in the science of reading, or making sure that your teachers, special ed teachers, are cross-trained in a variety of, I'm talking about dyslexia specific, right? Are cross-trained in Orton Gillingham and Wilson, and being able to provide like a plethora of services, whether it's for students with autism, students with social emotional behavior challenges in district, again, with high quality. Otherwise, parents will be seeking out placements for those students, is ultimately, I think, the best way to curb costs in terms of placement of students.
I would agree with that, where I would say 100% having high quality in district programs is your best way to contain costs. Where I think we struggle is the escalating costs because of some parents expecting a higher level of service than maybe is necessary for their child. And a lot of times we agree to it because of the due process situation and the burden of proof issue. Another thing that a recent issue that I was challenged by is because it's become harder to retain teachers to teach in our ESY program, we've had to raise the pay. I'm kind of already in the hole heading into summer of 2024 because of just making sure I can run a program with, you know, certified teachers and all of that. So those are pieces, you know, when folks request services that are maybe above and beyond what their child needs. And a lot of times we do have to just acquiesce to that because we realize that the cost to go to litigation is just prohibitive. But I would say, again, if you have high quality programs, you're going to reduce many of those issues.
And can I just say one other thing? You know, my biggest challenge is actually the inconsistency in state funds, especially with excess cost reimbursement. Like, I'll give an example. I mean, Fran has heard me say this because I've been passionate about it in half sport. But I went into last school year expecting a certain amount. We were told we were going to get 88% reimbursement And we ended up at 76% as the year progressed. But that is a huge problem. So I had to freeze my budget last year. And we got through it. But I think that fully funding the excess cost grant should be a priority. Because I think that, you know, it creates that tension between regular ed and special ed at times where you have to provide the services, and ethically and morally, I agree with that. So I want to be clear about that. Like I know that we have to provide a certain level of programming for our students with disabilities, but when you're expecting something and then you don't get it, it's hugely problematic. I mean, I was $1 million in the hole last year in special ed. And I can't imagine what Leslie experienced.
It does play out differently for us, right? Hartford operates within an ecosystem of school choice. And so we are responsible for those costs for all of the students, all Hartford residents in magnets that are operated by others, open choice. And we're talking about a third of our budget. And, you know, I have about a $450 million budget. So $150 million for special education, about 20 to 22 million in transportation alone. And if it were not for in-district programs, we would be, you know, responsible for about another $30 million in payment. And so, yeah, it is an added challenge because we know that tier 1 instruction supports, you know, to do that and to do it well with fidelity and sustain those programs, that also costs, right, money. And so it is a collision every year for us. And every year I've had to mitigate anywhere from $15 to $20 million. And making sure that we maintain the integrity of the programming and the services for our students is at the center of that challenge.
Let me follow up on finance. Excess cost is only reimbursement for the most high cost placements.
In district. Yeah.
In district,
yeah.
and out of district,
Right.
anyway, out of district. 1, 2, the money goes to the municipality and not to the school board.
That's not true.
No.
Not true in Newington either.
You worked out agreements.
Yeah, yeah.
You worked out agreements with the municipality.
Yes.
That's what the statute says. Is there a scheme of direct funding for special education? Makes sense.
I advocated to my legislative last session, if they just fully funded it, which I think they attempted to do, at least my delegation. And I know there were some bills where they
Yeah.
went forward, but you can't find out in the middle of the year, Andy. You can't find out in the middle of the year that you're going to get a significant less amount of funding than you're anticipating. And some of it's due to, yes, a child might move in and create access. We're used to that, like when we have to plan for it, right? But when you're, like I said, when you're expecting a certain amount of reimbursement and then it gets.
I hear that point. I'm just asking about funding of the basic special ed program, funding of the in-district programs. You know, most 95% of all kids are not excess cost kids. How about, is there a scheme that makes sense to you where we can fund special education in district and not just provide a subsidy for the really high price programs?
Well, yeah, I would love to consider it. I mean.
Well, it's supposed to be 20% of ECS.
Right.
Is that true, or is?
We don't see CS.
No,
in our-
ECS goes straight to the town, so that's
course.
another component.
So it offsets our overall budget in the tax base in the community, but it doesn't go directly to the district.
I guess
I don't
it
know.
could work, except for us, we have about another 2,500 students that are educated outside of Hartford Public Schools that we are responsible for. And those costs, those billing, we can't control. I mean, if I showed you the variance in charges that we get from districts, you know, I have very little control over that.
I would add, we have it at a much smaller scale than Leslie, but all of our children who are in magnet schools,
Right.
we are responsible for their special education costs. And what I get billed for a paraprofessional is what a teacher costs in my district. So we have no control of that. We attend the PPTs, of course, but if they're saying the child needs a para, there's not a whole lot we can do about that. So I would say some sort of, I know there's been efforts toward magnet cost subsidies. I know that's still in the works. I know this committee probably doesn't have control over the federal government. They have not stepped up to the plate. And certainly talked to Miguel Cardona about that. You know, they've never really come to the plate with the full amount of funding they should for special ed. But in terms of what the state could do, it would be nice to have some more offsets from the state because we all have now upwards of 15% of our population with special ed. And that's average. I'm sure some districts are higher than that,
17.
quite a bit higher.
21.
And it just widely, and that's a huge impact to the district. And, you know, we do struggle with that. We meet with families, we do all the things we can do, but the costs continue to go through the roof.
So in terms of eligible, we hear that kids are designated as special ed to get services that may or may not really qualify. Is that something that happens very frequently that, you know, when
I think that, so I'm just gonna talk for Bethel, because I can't speak to other districts. I think that there are definitely a small amount of kids. I'm not gonna say it's large, but I also think it's because we have a pretty comprehensive intervention program. So kids can get literacy, math intervention, support with behavioral, at all the tiers, right?
Okay.
I think where we struggle though is we would like to offer more intervention services. But we're limited by the amount of interventionists we have or specialists that we have that can provide support to those kids. So, but I don't think it's a widespread problem, Bethel.
I won't say that either in Newington because there has been the SRBI development or multidisciplinary systems. And parents do trust that the child is getting those services without the need for an IEP. In fact, it used to be forbidden that a student who didn't have an IEP could go into a special ed class to get Wilson training. Now we can do that.
Yes.
Then that helps prevent unnecessary referrals. Where the costs start to escalate is existing special ed students and the types of services about, you know, what is appropriate and what might be more than is necessary to educate the child, to make reasonable, under the federal law, making reasonable progress in light of their circumstances.
We have seen a few cases in which this is an open choice placement.
Right.
In which when we do a deep dive case review, we question at the district whether or not that would have been a referral for special education.
Right.
And we wonder whether it's an issue of a culturally, a lack of culturally responsive programming for that student. I don't have a data point, but I have had specific cases in which when we've done a review, we would wonder.
I don't want to go too deep into this, but one more question. Look, special ed, an entitlement, you have to spend the money to provide a thing.
Can you say that again?
Yeah.
Special ed,
The brainstorm.
special ed, it's an entitlement, you have to spend the money to provide a thing. Interventionists, for MTSS, you don't have to. There's no requirement that you do that. So
Well, yes,
if you have the
100%.
interventionists you need, provide the interventions at each of the tiers, or does the higher rate of interventionists not take place because you have to fund special ed?
Well, no, because I would push back and say, if you're going to make a referral to special ed and it's a learning disability that you're exploring, you have to provide the data to be able to support the referral. So, and that's what I tell my board of ed, you know, in terms of that conversation. I just think, and I'm reacting a little bit post-COVID too, because I think we're seeing more kids in intervention post-COVID than we had previously. So I think that you could make the argument that it is that part of that continuum of services, and ultimately it's going to save the district money, because if the child is receiving the appropriate interventions at a lower tier, they're not going to end up in a referral to special ed. So I think there's an argument to be made that it's part of that continuum. So yes, well, you're technically right. I think that ultimately making that argument and making it effectively, I personally would like more interventionists, especially post-COVID.
Yeah, I just want to, say that this panel's heard from me over and over again. When I went into Bridgeport in my first year, first week on the job, I had a leadership team meeting and I put up the triangle and I said tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Who does tier 1 classroom teacher? Who does tier 2 classroom teacher? tier 3 classroom teacher. There were no interventionists. And so my thinking was, we're looking at both sides, both the academic piece and the behavioral piece. I saw and never felt disparagingly about the teachers, but I saw them referring kids for special ed services, especially in the early grades. And yeah, because the kids needed help and there weren't the interventionists available. So I do think that that is important to have a full cadre of people that can work with the classroom teacher. I also have class sizes of 28. So, working with the classroom teacher to make that happen. The other piece that, we have spent some time on, and we just would love to hear your wisdom on it, is there's a couple of things with the shortages of special ed. I mean, it's nothing new to any of you. Special ed teachers are a shortage area throughout the state, psychologists, et cetera. Let me ask you this. There are a couple of things that have come out on the task force. Number one, some feel that special ed teachers do not receive the respect in these school districts and are wondering perhaps that's one of the factors. Also, I have personally spoken to a lot of special ed teachers since I was on this task force, and they're telling me they came to the profession to help kids and they're doing all the paperwork. And so how do we look at both of those things? If you could comment on that, and if you could also comment on your ideas to alleviate the situation.
I would say for special ed teachers feeling undervalued, I think they do need support. They're dealing with the most challenged populations in the district. Recently, I added another special ed supervisor because I was seeing some exodus of my special ed teachers, and they were at exit interviews saying, I just didn't feel all that supported. So I think that's an important piece, that they get training, that they're part of teams, that they're part of PLCs. That's extremely important. In terms of the paperwork, I'm not sure how to rectify that. That's been a historical issue. It's a lot of their day, whether they're typing up an evaluation or they're doing an IEP. It's just a very time-consuming component. In fact, it spills over to our secretaries too, because they're kind of tidying things up and getting things out in a timely fashion. I've gotten some complaints from them as systems are been changing lately. So I'd love to know how to change the IEP. It's only gotten more complex in my history in education.
I think that the job is way more difficult than when I was a special ed teacher. I think that the level of challenges, whether it's an academic issue that you're trying to remediate or behavioral, is much different than it was like 10, 15 years ago. And I think that, when you look at, listen, we've always had kids that are behaviorally challenged or children on the spectrum who might be self-injurious or have a regular practice of injuring staff. I just feel it's been amplified. I am highly concerned, although it's getting better, about the birth of 3 population coming in. And my concern is that, and I think during COVID, it was because they didn't get services that they needed. And they weren't in preschool programs because a lot of parents felt uncomfortable putting their child in preschool. So, I mean, legitimately, they felt that way. But the kids coming in with very young kids with major mental health issues. And I've said this, like, and it's a little passion of mine, that the mental services, and I'm not talking about school services, I'm talking about mental health services for children in the state of Connecticut is deplorable. It takes so long to even get an appointment for parents to address needs. And if God forbid a child needs more significant issues like a hospitalization or stabilization with medication or whatever their needs are, they're suicidal. you can't get services. And, we'll send a kid to the ER within a crisis intervention. They'll be back on our doorsteps at 7 o'clock the next morning with no treatment. And we have a legal and ethical and moral responsibility to address those issues. But until the state actually takes mental health of children seriously, outside of what the school can provide. I mean, we can provide what we can provide, and we will provide that. We're going to continue to struggle.
I can add just two things with regard to making sure that our educators are supported. And we've been doing that in the last 2 years, specifically through special education coaches. But that's not going to be available a year from now because our ESSER funding is sunsetting. And so that's where it lives. And with regard to, we currently have about 37 vacancies, by the way, in special education, which is much better than last year, though it's still a high number. Just the work around pipeline development work that we're all trying to figure out, right? Making sure that our paraeducators have, steps into becoming certified educators, but that doesn't happen overnight, right? It takes time. And so the immediate fix, I don't know what it is, besides making sure that we do provide professional learning, to your point, and create a culture in which special ed teachers and paraeducators, because they are with students that have the higher level of need, feel supported in multiple ways. But it is not a fix for tomorrow morning.
No.
Well, I would add one more element to that besides the lower respect of special ed teachers, the enormous paperwork burden they face, and also the hazardousness of it.
Yeah.
The injuries among special ed teachers
They are very high.
I do have a question. Do you find that you're short inclusion teachers or program kids? We have a lot of problems filling programs, like our alternate program or you see a difference or you just have an overall
We're across the continuum.
trust team?
It's the more specialized programs have more turnover because of the
So you
burnout.
do that too?
Yes.
We
Okay.
do. I do.
I do too.
Okay.
The openings that we had this year were in autism and multi.
All right, we see the same thing.
Very demanding programs and very students with significant needs.
So we've talked about teacher shortage. Is the para shortage solely an issue of pay, or is there other things involved there?
I think, go ahead.
I think it's certainly pay is significant for our paraeducators and what we're asking them to do.
What do you pay a para?
We're at about $30,000 at the higher level. You think about that. What does that translate into?
Yeah.
Not a living
In an
wage.
hour, in an hourly,
Yeah.
you've got to get it right.
I'm probably similar in cost. We do provide full health insurance to our paras as well. So the overall cost is about, I don't know, 60,000 a para.
57,
Yeah,
60,
60,000 a para. We struggle keeping them. A lot of times it's because they're working very closely with very challenging students. And so, if they're being bit or hit or, during that course of the day, it's difficult. It's a difficult job.
And you know what? I just want to stop for 1 minute. I feel like Andy and I have really dominated the questions here. And we have a whole task force. I also want to introduce or have Mike Rowe introduce himself.
Mike Gross, Assistant Superintendent of American Public Schools. I represent CASO.
And I can't see who's.
Amy.
Huh?
Amy Turner.
Amy, yes, please introduce
Good
yourself.
morning, Amy Turner, Assistant Superintendent Wallingford, Concase President.
Okay,
I would.
great to see
Did
you.
Heather identify herself?
Yeah, I did introduce her. Are there other questions, please? I don't want to dominate.
I do have a question. Has there been any consideration or conversation about caseloads as they've increased, I'm sure, with the shortage of special ed teachers? Has that been a conversation from at any point on why teachers are leaving special ed or not coming in? Several teachers that we hired this year came from districts where their caseloads were exorbitant and they were burnt out and they were looking for a smaller caseload. I can reference two of my new hires that were from urban districts that with 35 kids on a caseload, and it's just undoable. You never feel like you're getting anywhere with children. So that is a problem, and I have hired more special ed teachers to offset that. Again, that's your money's, some of that's gonna be challenging to maintain.
It's come up in negotiations, definitely, but we did try to deal with it by hiring more special ed teachers to lower caseloads. So it didn't end up becoming a contract issue, but we did agree that we were going to have regular conversations if people felt their cases are too high. And I think you all know that caseloads are different, right? If you're a student primarily working with students with learning disabilities, that's very different than maybe having 5 kids. That might be like 50, and I felt that as a special ed teacher. So I think coming up with like hard and fast regulations I don't know that that's wise, because it's very dependent based on the student population that you're serving. But it did come up at one point, but we did hire 3 more special ed teachers over the past couple of years to manage that.
Now, has Hartford been losing teachers to people like Maureen?
Sure. And we welcome special educators from other districts as well. I think it's just
That's what I was
fluid.
gonna talk about.
Say again?
I was gonna ask about that a bit. I know that I've observed more movement in all educators, past districts, right, in the last couple of years. And so I wonder if you have thoughts about strategies we can implement statewide to how to buy back some of that time. So as we are treating paras possibly or special education teachers, are there certain assured experiences that they all have that we could create? Maybe you have other ideas, but I've been thinking about, is there a statewide system, for example, for certain mandated training that we could say, this person just did this in claims, why are we repeating this again? And because we know that our time with them to do high quality professional learning is so precious, but just thoughts about that, how we can maybe work more collaboratively with the movement we're seeing.
Well, I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the pay scales are like initially the first trigger, right, that we hear from staff that caused the move. And so that is not something that I can control at the moment. There's a case right now in which a teacher went to another district, got the steps, and is now at our doorstep again saying, I know I left in June, I'm ready to come back. And so we have to now determine whether or not to welcome this teacher back and have a
higher price, yeah.
$14,000 pay increase. While everyone else has stayed with us, right, on the same salary. That's just one example. So I hear you, but I think it's hard for us to get there without also thinking about how do we leverage, some more equity. And I know that with individual, we're talking about 173, I don't know,
Yeah.
right? Different
And I think-
municipalities.
Yeah, and I think regionally it's dependent, like Bethel's in Fairfield County, but we're ranked 149th in per pupil spending as opposed to Ridgefield right next door to us. And so a teacher can leave my district and make $12,000 to $15,000 more just by driving a few miles down the road. And, so that is a problem.
And, no state has a statewide salary range for teachers. Surprisingly, I thought there would be.
I also think that you're looking at working conditions many times, and so you challenge district. My exit interviews told me that teacher said, I want to be successful. And you don't have the supports in place in Bridgeport at that time to be successful. So I'm going elsewhere where I will feel good about coming. I want to make sure that I'm hearing everybody. Do you have other questions for our wonderful panel? Yep, go ahead, Lisa.
It's not really a question, but really just a thought for this group is hearing Dr. Carver talk about the unpredictability of the excess cost grant. So even when the General Assembly, thinks that they're providing full funding for excess costs, because of the timing of when claims come into the state of Connecticut, it could result in increased claims and therefore a reduction across the board for excess cost payments. So in the statute, there's language that states that when the state appropriation is insufficient, all grants will be reduced to equal the appropriation. Something that we could recommend is to eliminate that language, so it'll force the state to fund up to the percentage that they intend, or now according to the tiers, and have the state just lapse, or excuse me, just create a deficiency in that account that would need to be addressed later on.
I like that idea.
I do too.
Very much.
I don't think that language. Still don't know anything.
Yeah, no, I'm very aware that that language exists. So, yeah, I think that'd be awesome if that could happen.
Other questions?
Well, in the future, I'd like to get a special ed teacher from Hartford, and a special ed teacher from Newington or West Hartford, talking about how their jobs are different or the same.
That would probably be a very interesting discussion.
Yeah. Or even if if you want to visit the district, come visit.
Come
And we'll set up some
yeah.
focus groups for you. I'm happy to provide that. You can see the types of programs we offer and have an opportunity to talk to staff, talk to parents, what they're going through on a day-to-day basis.
So I also serve on the Blue Ribbon Committee for Early Intervention for Early Childcare. And, we were very much looking forward a year ago to President Biden, including universal preschool in his proposal. Unfortunately, that did not pass. What are your thoughts about that?
Very important.
Philosophically, it would be huge. It'd be a game changer, I think. I think when you come down to the practical logistics of it, I have no space. Our enrollment is increasing drastically. Believe it or not, we're increasing as much as Danbury is, but just at a much smaller scale. And we just wouldn't have space for expansion of programs. But if there was funding for it, I think it would be very good.
Structurally, we've tried to do a lot of shifts. I was able to do universal pre-K in Plainville with Smart Start grant and another grant that we were able to leverage. Those have all dried up. I've just opened 2 full week pre-Ks in Newington, and hopefully next year with the change in the kindergarten eligibility age, I've already looked at how many kindergarten teachers are pre-K certified to see if we can leverage that. But again, that might not be sustainable. I think pre-K is essential, and I've said this to Dr. Cardona as well, to the well-being of our kids and for equity purposes, because if kids have access to pre-K,
And it needs to be full day.
those gaps often don't form, and there's been studies to that effect. So I think it's an important, critically important initiative.
We have a unique challenge also in Hartford so first of all, we have 10 pre-K4 classrooms across our district, about 330 slots, which are not full. And we have our magnet schools that offer pre-K programming. The challenges that we charge our neighborhood school families a fee, right, on a sliding scale. And even if it's a $3 to $5 charge, right, that might be a challenge for some of our families whose income is $20,000 a year. And so there are barriers at play when you really look close. And that's not the case with the requirement for.
Sorry.
Flood alert.
It's not a requirement for a magnet, right? A family in a magnet school. The other piece is that in the city of Hartford, we have many community-based centers. And while there are slots there, right, those experiences are also different. And we have an internal competition in the city where, we're recruiting everywhere, and the community-based centers that end up losing their staff, right, to us in our schools. And so it's a challenge in multiple ways, but pre-K, it's a foundation.
I would agree, and if I can just say, we on the Blue Ribbon panel are facing the same thing that we're talking about in special ed, in terms of not having enough early care workers, and they're being so underpaid, and who is going to make, obviously, we're going to make a recommendation for higher pay. Who's going to come through to provide that and sustain it?
And I just want to say one more thing about the cost of preschool. I mean, we know that, and I fully support the change in age to September 1st. I think it's the best thing that the state has done in a long time. But we are going to have to hire more preschool teachers because we're going to have students who are eligible on their 3rd birthday who are going to need an extra year of preschool. So therefore, there's going to be an additional cost to this starting in that year. Next year.
Yeah, next year.
So we're already starting to prepare our Board of Eds and Board of Finance, because I don't think people knew the implications of that.
No, that there are 9,000 children statewide that are, at least 9,000 that will be affected.
About a third of your incoming kindergartners will be
Yes.
age ineligible now.
Absolutely. So listen, I want to thank you, number one, and I want to see if there's any other wisdom that you want to impart or anything that the task force wants to ask or recommend. We are very serious about making this a different task force that's really significant and realistic, and that the recommendations go through. If you had your dream, what would be top recommendation for the task force?
Keeps me up at night is funding.
Funding.
It really does.
I mean,
It does have a huge impact.
Having worked in 4 different states in special ed, Connecticut does a good job. They really do. We provide excellent services for our kids, but the burden of proof, I'll put that out there, is super challenging. Those other 3 states I referenced did not, they had a different burden of proof statute. And it was a much different environment, far less litigious. And I would endorse that.
I think it's a +1 for me, and that we don't lose sight of the implications on marginalized communities.
Right.
When we think about special education programming and communities that serve a high concentration of poverty to begin with.
And I want to add one thing, though, Leslie referenced it earlier, is Connecticut's becoming extremely diverse. Newington is now almost 50% non-white. And that's, I'm sure that's nothing compared to some of our urban districts. Culturally responsive pedagogy needs to be part of this discussion, because if the education in tier 1 isn't such that it meets the needs of all of our cultures, we're only going to see these rates go up, right? Because it's going to be not because of a special ed issue, it's going to be because of a culturally responsive pedagogy issue.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure, best to the best of my ability. Just going from a district that's become significantly diverse and maybe didn't realize it. We're working hard to implement strategies within the classroom that meet the needs of your classroom that now has multiple cultures. And if you don't have diverse titles, if you haven't done racial bias training, if you haven't done training around having courageous conversations when your data that you're looking at a PLC is clearly indicative of your Black and brown kids are doing far worse than your white kids. Those pieces need to be part of the discussion when we talk about special ed, because it's only going to get more intense.
And/or I think we're much better at it, but like inappropriate referrals, right?
Yes.
So like a child who's a multilingual learner getting referred for speech services when it's really a language acquisition issue. It's like, how does the teaching staff learn to make those distinctions? Yeah, it's part of our responsibility to teach them. But as we're seeing, and we are in Bethel too, we're seeing a much different demographic, and we definitely have about double the multilingualers than when I started 10 years ago. So making sure that people understand those and are making appropriate referrals based on, obviously federal law, and not confusing it with maybe characteristics because they are from another country or don't have the language.
There are cultural nuances, right?
Yeah.
That play out very differently in a classroom environment. And if the classroom, the pedagogy, the instruction, the delivery, the adults in the classroom see students through one lens, that creates a very myopic response, whether it is in the intervention or the referral. And so I just think, thinking about it more broadly, and it might be an opportunity even for this task force to take a step back and just have some conversations about what that is and what we mean by culturally responsive, programming.
And the 2 solutions are teacher training, short term.
Yes.
And bringing in more teachers who look like the kids.
That's right.
In the future.
Without a doubt.
That's a long.
Probably higher ed too.
Yeah, but you can't forget about policy, right? There are, I have to make sure that policies are also culturally responsive.
To allow
Absolutely.
more entry into the teaching profession.
And it's not just the teachers, everyone throughout the organization. I mean, it's beyond teachers, right? Like, you have educators in the broadest sense, all the people, the adults that children interface with.
Right.
From the school secretary to the, like, how are we lifting the level of all?
Culture, yeah, the organizational culture.
It is, I just want to say, because I promised them that they would, move on. These are my wonderful, esteemed colleagues and, they come through on everything for me when I never like to make decisions or recommendations in a vacuum, and they are, the people I call for, advice. And I think you can see why. They're just, very steeped in making sure that what they do is right for kids. So I want to thank them, just so much.
Can I just have one more?
Oh.
You talked about having to get more teachers for the preschool now. How do you feel like you're impacted with the fact that they moved to the age of 22 at the end of the school year? Is that, because that's, again, more money. And that's because I work in that group of kids, where they just changed it from being the day before the 22nd, and they didn't, I don't know what they thought about impacting these programs. It's going to be more money because they're staying.
Well, part of the problem was the implementation date, right? We had it was after the budgets were passed.
Yeah.
So for Bethel, I think we're like short $250,000 now. Just, and that's just our out of district placement,
Right.
never mind the staff that have to work in districts in our, we call it our community partnership program, transition program. So yeah, it was definitely a huge impact, and for whatever reason, and it could be totally my fault, I didn't hear a lot about it during the
They
session.
didn't.
No,
they
they
didn't.
And then,
I would, it's not about whether or not we have to provide. That's not my issue about whether or not we have to provide it. It's about getting adequate notice of it.
Right. So we
And then.
saying not next year, but doing it right now is what really I think.
It definitely made
Not
it
giving a
worse.
year, yeah.
It definitely made it worse, in terms of, finances
And
and
we-
staffing.
and
Right.
staffing, and we're doing a survey, we will be doing a survey just to determine what that cost is statewide.
Transportation,
yeah.
space, facility,
I don't have space, yeah.
more stuff.
And I don't know if anyone thought about everybody leaving at the end of the school year for the services after that, because now there's gonna be a vacuum. And then,
I just had one comment about that as a parent.
I'm a parent as well, that's why.
Yeah, I just want one comment about that as a parent. You really fall off the cliff when your kid exits the school system. And the state needs to look at their adult services, because it is vastly different than what they receive.
Oh, but they, yeah.
And I don't think parents fully understand that. And I think that if you really want to make a recommendation, it's for the state, and it feels like, and I'm not sure this perception is accurate. It feels like they put it back on the districts to increase programs and services for them, which is just delaying the inevitable, which is once they leave us, that there's almost nothing available.
What are the arguments?
I'm sure. 100%, I would make that argument, but at some point, the state has to take responsibility for adults with disabilities. And whether it's through DMIS or DDS, it's just very different.
You're right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your efforts. Thank you. We appreciate your time and expertise.
You're gonna be joining.
Great. 5 minute break.
I don't know, I'm waiting to know what the next steps are. I don't think I have to.
Well, you're not, we started, you're stuck. It's
Oh,
like,
no.
we did it, we look it out, right? We did it like in today.
Workshop last night, and a question came up
We
about
figured they're not
special ed.
coming out.
Well, they think I'm like, oh, no, I'm not.
I think you are, but
Please help yourselves.
it hasn't happened yet.
We're
We're gonna make it happen.
So I think that's important. Yes.
Yeah. It is.
Diverse.
It is. Early
Practitioners. So.
Yeah, also, the pipeline is definitely, especially with the Haven.
No, I have not. Great.
Off the wall, in a lot of cases, very outspoken, and just.
I literally.
Yeah, I know that
Terry.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Take
And we
care.
went through an entire session, Rob, went through an entire session, nobody trashed CTC.
Jen? And,
Yeah, the state advisory council meeting just ended.
oh, okay,
At 10:30.
okay, good.
And Susan, yeah, we-
So the next item on the agenda is where we go with moving forward on recommendations. And I know my esteemed co-chair sent out a list of recommendations and, you know, I certainly got some emails, and I'm sure he did, about this is what I agree with, this is what I don't agree with. I think Andy did a good job of saying these are not recommendations moving forward. They're just considerations on his part. And I know we got some more from Jason, and so I think what we want to do is start to hear from all of you, your subcommittees, on what are your bold, significant, realistic recommendations going forward. Because we do have an interim report due, I think, February of 24. And full report obviously is the following year. So I just want to put it on the table and see what you're thinking about recommendations or where we might go. We didn't put in subgroup committee reports today, but are there things that are coming up for you, either individually or as a subgroup, and the subgroup chairs can talk about that? We just want to make sure that we're inclusive and we're getting everybody's recommendations on the table. Go ahead, Patrice.
So the finance subcommittee did meet last week, and we looked at Andy's letter, and the meeting was Lisa, Jason, Mike, Sheila, and myself. Sheila is our helpful observer to keep us on track. We did come up with a series of recommendations. I think some of them we would probably modify based on some of the discussion here today. But I can just go through those.
That's great.
I'd also appreciate them in writing at some point.
Sure, absolutely.
And that's also true of Lisa, what Lisa suggested earlier today. I'm not going to remember the details of that.
So support, since at least for the current year, it looks like we might be at full funding for ECS. Support for the continuation of full funding of the excess cost reimbursement, but certainly the idea of removing the cap on that grant so that we are not all subject to the uncertainty of how much the costs are going to be statewide, impact what individual districts receive. I'm fairly certain that the members of the finance subcommittee would be in support of. Second, to look at establishing a special education rate in this ECS formula specifically, because we lost that. I mean, the theory is that the ECS grant is 20% of that is compensation for special ed costs, but that's only a theoretical idea that is now 15 years old. So looking at that to address those costs that don't meet the threshold of the excess cost. Third, support for universal access to pre-K, recognizing that not all schools have the space or the staff, but there are private providers that our discussion was we have no interest in putting them out of business if they're offering quality programs, making sure that students have access to those. And obviously that's more important now than ever with the higher age of entry for school. Establishing a model state contract for private special ed services, because there are situations, as indicated in the auditor's report, where a district and a private provider don't have a contract in place. And it appears that that has to do with, at least in some cases, the private provider not agreeing to the provisions that the district's council feels are critical. And finally, looking at establishing some sort of recommended service charges for a variety of services. Massachusetts has that model in place because we do hear a lot about the variation in terms of costs that a district might be paying to the same provider for different students receiving what are very comparable services, and certainly differences among districts, what they are being charged. So that's where we are, and we will get this to you in writing.
On the issue of a weight, does something more need to be done to ensure that that money is actually spent on special education rather than used for other things?
You know, the issue of the dollar, none of the dollars that come from the state have little markers on them that say this goes to preschool and this goes to interventionist. So I'm not sure that that is really the problem, but that's my personal opinion.
Okay.
I'm not sure that helps us. As it's been said about the excess cost, if we fully funded the excess cost grant consistently, a lot of other problems would go away because it would free up resources for interventionists, for example.
I hear you.
Great, and I think our process will be having all of these recommendations come forward, in writing, so to speak, to Andy and me, and then as a group, we will put them all on the table. And we'll, reach consensus on which ones go forward. I've seen the consensus protocol that we use for evaluation, that we're going to use for certification council. I think that would be a good way to decide which recommendations will be able to move forward. Are there others that you want to throw out now? Okay, well, we don't have a lot of time, I'm hoping that by November, we have all of the recommendations on the table. And the reason I say that is, we're gonna need time to write the report, to review the report with you and make all the changes necessary and to get it in to the legislature by the beginning of February. I know that my recommendation overall, I don't think it's going to come as a surprise to anybody, but I'm certainly going to be looking for smaller class sizes and pushing that forward. I know it's negotiated, but I think, nothing's been said at the state level about class size. I absolutely, if I had my druthers, it would be 15 kids in a class and individual programming for each child. And I think you'd see something major happening. And frankly, I don't think it'll take place in my lifetime, but I do believe education will move in that direction.
And I do think that intensity of caseloads and caseload sizes are something that we could be creative about in terms of proposing class size limits, but also talk about the intensity of services those special ed teachers are providing. It's different in every district. I've taught in Waterbury, I teach in Chicago now. And I'm telling you, I know that that's a reason why teachers go from one place to the other, caseload and the amount of money they're going to make and that respect that they think they're receiving from those districts. That is a big game changer for special ed teachers. And I think if we start to acknowledge the fact that the intensity of services that some students require should change the caseload of a special ed teacher, that's something that could sort of put forward that respect that's missing from teachers.
And I know they started talking about stay interviews. Why do people stay? Get more information. I mean, that's a big piece of figuring out why are people staying in the position they are. We had, our convocation at the beginning of the year, we had people there for 35 years, 25, and that's you're doing something about it. They're trying, and there's a lot of documentation and data that the rest are doing about what these stage reviews should ask. It's simple, 5 questions, but there's things that are built into it that are trying to get at the point why do people stay instead of saying why are they leaving? Make it more positive, I think.
I'd like to pursue the case load issue. My concern is that any sort of regulation on that will inherently fail to deal with the diversity of needs of kids. And so I'm wondering how we can propose something on caseloads that actually makes a difference.
I think if we're gonna propose anything on caseloads, it has to talk about intensity of services. It can't be, it's not the same as a class size for kindergarten should be 15 and a class size for a science lab is 24. You can't have that. It's gonna have to talk about the intensity of services. So I think I need to do a little more thinking on what that would look like, and I'll get back to the task force on that.
Can I hop in on that just a little bit? I do agree that caseloads need to be a little bit smaller when you have special programs and whatnot, but we're really opening ourselves up for liability because we already have a shortage of staff. And if we're looking at reducing caseloads across the board, it's going to put districts in a huge liability. And I think that's something that the task force needs to consider. So they may be recommended, but forcing them might, while we're still in a staff shortage, may have some huge ramifications, especially for inner city districts that can't find special education teachers.
Yeah, I don't just like last year, we were like 35, almost 40 at our high schools. We were just short, like 8 or 9 special ed teachers. So we had to cover them, like someone had to be in charge of the students. So just get worried if we lock into a hard number.
Well, at least
And
if we
we can't
make a
do it.
recommendation, at least
And we
if
make
we're
a
making a recommendation that that's where we need to be, because we know as a task force, that that's something that's gonna provide the best education for students.
We can
At
make
the
a
very
recommendation. I
least.
just know like the state said you can't be above 25. You know what I mean? I'm not sure some of the cities would be able to.
Well, I know in like our language or our contracts, it talks about, like we could have up to 7 because we're a risk. So we have that for my population, but like a TD therapeutic day program, it was up to 10 but there's a caveat based on the intensity of needs. Like, so it's in there that's a discussion with the teacher because we can't fit them in the room. I mean, that's the thing, even these are like as adults, the ones I work with, they're huge kids. They're men and women, you know, and there's a piece of that we can only control because of environment too, so. But it helps the fact that if you have kids that are really intense behaviorally, you don't have 10 of them all together, you know, based on, and then you get staff that's supposed to be supportive in that language to make sure you have pairs. You're not gonna have 10 of those kids with a teacher and a para. Like I have 4 boys now because of the, you know, who they are, but I have 2 male staff with me. Now, if I had, but one goes back, so like, there's a piece in there that you can think about that we do have in contract and in contracting language.
So
throughout the
if
year.
if there's recommendations on the state level, then there's something that, you know, contract negotiations can look towards to say, hey, these are our caseloads now. This is the recommendation from the state. Let's try to get closer. And I don't think we're going to be in the same shortage forever. So we need to be thinking forward, not in the immediate needs. There are immediate needs, but there are future needs too.
I think we've got to be very careful in all our recommendations, to be thinking about phasing in stuff.
Yeah.
Just a comment, maybe thinking about this from a different perspective instead of having a number in mind. What is a case manager? And what does a case manager do? And I pose that because IDA doesn't define case management. We get questions all the time at the state, you know, I have this person, can they be a case manager? And we say, well, what are they doing? If we're talking about paperwork and processes, that's a different conversation than specialized instruction. So how many students can a speech and language pathologist see in their day, given their schedule, and meet the needs of those students? So it's a different way to look at it, instead of putting like, it's not a class that we're talking about, it's a program, it's a school, and those numbers are so variable that, you know, we tend to see lower numbers at elementary school and higher numbers at high school. Is that because there's less specialized instruction? Is that because programming is different? So I think we can maybe approach it from that sense. And I don't know, or I haven't seen a definition of a case manager. And that maybe is a local sort of decision making type. But then you're not getting into contract negotiations and those types of things. What's happening?
Yeah, I just think it's so difficult because of the nature of the child.
Right.
You know, how do you quantify?
Exactly, right.
What would be the purpose of that, are we thinking? Or
I'm
like
thinking-
more for like attracting
About attracting and retaining teachers, about making the day more manageable, about not losing special ed teachers and being able to keep them in the profession. As caseloads have increased, and I believe intensity of services has also increased since COVID. The burnout of special ed teachers is astronomical. And then when special ed teachers are facing burnout during the school year, there's more attendance issues for the teachers, and then there's nobody servicing the kids because you're throwing in a substitute. You can't get special ed substitutes. They don't exist. They don't exist because when they leave, they don't come back.
I've asked the state, I've asked Chief, if there's any data on length of service of special ed teachers versus length of service of regular ed teachers. My assumption is it's much shorter, but I'm
Well,
not.
and most of the special ed teachers are certified in something else, so they may start special ed and then go into being regular ed teachers. There are several of those. There are several of those in our Chinese school at Chippewa. That are special ed.
Hi, this is Susan Yankee. When it comes to special education substitutes, school districts just ask their regular substitutes to fill in for a special ed student. Sometimes it's one-on-one, and they are not trained at all. They just have the bloodborne pathogens training and that kind of basic training. They aren't trained. So substitutes either don't want to take that assignment, but there needs to be some sort of training across the board that's required. If you're going to ask a substitute to work with special education students, you have to give them some toolbox. Otherwise, they walk away, just like your regular special education teachers. You can't put people in situations they can't handle and expect them to keep coming back. Sorry, that's my own.
But when you don't have people, and that's, I feel like that's where we are, we're desperate. Back in the day, I used to have building substitutes that were trained and knew the school well and knew children well and could rotate them through different classrooms. And they're part of a community. Now you're just looking for a body for safety. I mean, really. So we're in it's a different time, unfortunately.
So I just want to throw out something in a very different, you know, I need to be educated on a very different topic. When I was in Bridgeport, we had way too many emotionally disturbed classrooms or emotionally disabled students in classrooms. It's always bothered me, and I don't know quite how to make the recommendation, but when you put 6 or 8 emotionally disabled kids together in one room with one teacher, is that really good for those kids? I'm just asking because it never, I know that we did it because we didn't have another way and maybe we tried to mainstream them for part of the day or whatever. But I was never happy with what I saw in those classrooms. It just bothered me tremendously. And I would want to put it forward as some type of recommendation, but maybe I'm off the wall. I'm not a special ed background person, so.
There are also parents of children with autism who make the same argument. They're putting my kid in a room with a bunch of nonverbal kids is not helping my kid.
Yeah.
CEA has found some research, and I'm going to send to you around caseload state by state as well, that maybe we could share with her.
And Brian, a caseload, according to this, is a group of students with individual education programs that a special education teacher is responsible for managing. Class size means the number of students being instructed in a group at any one time. So that's what this says.
What do you have? What are you reading there?
This is from a review of caseload policy state by state.
So I'm
She's gonna
sending that
send
to
them to
Brandon
everybody that we got from.
So
Now I would
I'm
also
gonna
like
send
to
it
make.
to you guys because I don't know if I have the full list with all the new people. So I'm going to send it to you to send out.
I would also like to make a recommendation. I'd like to think about the issue of the continuum between regular education and interventions and special education. I think, despite what the superintendent said today, I think there really is a wall between the two in many cases. And reducing that wall, I think, would be a good thing for everybody. I'm not sure how you do that.
I worry about, going back to your question, Fran, about, you know, like, what's the right type of programming? And I feel like the more we try to be prescriptive around that, the less is that boxing us in more? You know, it's not black and white, we're talking about children. And, you know, it's gray, and so I don't know if there's one right way. Actually, I know there's not one right way. So it's hard to give definitive answers to things like that, because sometimes in a moment of time, that setting is right for a child,
Yeah.
but not all children. Maybe as that child matures, that setting's no longer, so it's hard to give hard and fast.
I get it.
You know, same with caseload, like it's hard to say this is the right number, or that, you know, are we boxing ourselves in more? I just would want to talk about those things a little bit more, whether we're opening it or are we ending it up giving recommendations that provide less flexibility.
Yeah.
Well, that's why we have a services work group. I wonder who's on it. Good recommendation.
No, I don't, I think she just quit.
I appreciate you just entertaining it. Anything else you want to bring forward today on recommendations?
Well, I would like to think big about what's structurally is a problem with special education now. You know, and maybe the idea is to sort of look at the area. You know, this continuum is one of those big areas. Funding is a big area. And then drill down to come to some recommendations in regard to that. You know, I think that's and the big area, and the single biggest area for me in all of this is the fact that kids in poverty and kids of color do not get the same level of services as white suburban kids get. And we've got to address that issue.
Town to town, you know, or district to district throughout the state, the experience is not the same.
Sure.
Just, kind of a color.
So it's going to be a question for all of you and us on what do we take on and what do we recommend, you know, to that will move forward. And, you know, again, pie in the sky is not, you know, I have my druthers. I do a lot of pie in the sky things, but I don't think it will fly. So what do we say as we go forward? And that's not for you to answer necessarily today, but we do have to answer it before November. You know, so that we can, and I think Andy and I, based upon what our conversation so far, and from the subgroups, will bring some recommendations, I hope, to the table in October. I think we need to start working on that.
Do we want to set a goal of what, do we want to have all of our recommendations brought by a certain?
Well, I would like to get, you know, I really am interested in doing a series of hearings over during October with various stakeholders to see what else comes up. What are the big issues?
Some in the evening so teachers can come to that.
I'm open to any time doing
I
it.
just want to put that on my table because teachers are going to be in school during.
And it's up to, you know,
And
we're gonna have to deal with the logistics of this.
Yeah.
But we're gonna, you know, we're gonna want groups of teachers, we're gonna want groups of parents, we're gonna want groups of parents, we're gonna want groups of business managers, you know, to talk about what they see as the big issues here without a lot of, you know, not responding to proposals necessarily, but making, but coming forward and talking to us about how the system could be better for them. And I'd like to do that, you know, partially to get that information and partially to provide the evidence to support our report. We have that on the record.
So what we've done on the blue ribbon for early care, rather than, you know, set up the public hearings, it's just another thought, Andy. We have done feedback sessions and we've publicized them and we've done it on Zoom. And we have said from 5 to 6 tonight, we will hear from superintendents on what your recommendations are for our blue ribbon or from parents. And it's been done over and over again. We've done, you know, quite a few of them. And I think we've gotten some great recommendations. I'll tell you, when I look at them, overall, they're not different from the recommendations that the blue ribbon is going to put forward. It's the same kind of recommendations, but there is something, we call it a listening tour. And we've done that. It's been easier for people to come and talk on Zoom or, get the link or whatever than it is for them to come, for instance, in person on a specific day.
The reason I would like to do it in the hearing format is because I want it covered by CTN. I want this issue to become much more out there as part of a general discussion. And that's to build up the political support we're going to need to get our recommendations.
So what if we did some of a listening tour and did one public hearing for anyone to come to speak to what should be the recommendations of a task force? I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm just worried that about people's access to coming to Hartford on 3 days.
I would agree with Fran that I think the access is going to be much greater if we do most of it virtually. And I would also say that October for school board, if you're looking for any input from school board members, it's an election year.
Yeah.
So
crazy.
October is about the worst time for school board member involvement for anything other than what they're focused on in their district and in their campaigns.
I also like the idea of Zoom. I think about some of the parents of families of students that I know. It would be really hard for them to find a
That's fine.
babysitter and.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, but obviously the legislature's been having hearings using Zoom, and we could do the same thing. I just, do want it out there and, that it's broadcast and that it's widely accessible.
This is Susan. Hi, everybody. I only worry if we want to include the special education teacher voice, that they are not going to want to speak up unless they're anonymous, especially since we had to have legislation to say that they wouldn't be punished for speaking up. So is there a way to include that voice or anyone's voice that wants to be anonymous?
So
It's hard with FOIA, Freedom of Information stuff.
would written testimony help with that?
Well, certainly they could submit written testimony and have somebody else read it in, I guess.
You have to, in order to do written testimony, you have to submit your name.
Yeah.
Well, that's the legislature.
So
We don't.
they might be able to compile comments from teachers and.
Have to identify.
Yeah, that's not identified. I mean, we do it all the time.
District.
Right.
Right.
Be helpful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
We do it all the
And,
time.
I would invite any of the groups of practice and to the different, there's a whole, everyone, I would invite them as well. And is there anyone in our group for charter schools? Because today at a meeting, it was brought up that charter schools are not being reimbursed for their special education services, and they're having a hard time. And the charter schools are in those districts, Andy, that you're talking about. And I didn't know if we were going to discuss funding and fully funding things that haven't been funded.
That issue is presently pending before the State Department of Education in a request for clarification filed in Waterbury. But it's a bigger issue than that on the level of reimbursement for charter schools. I'm not, I think that issue that is not totally separated from the issue of that Leslie was talking about getting charged wildly different amounts for the same services by different districts. That might be something that Patrice's group wants to look at, whether, some sort of standardized reimbursement levels makes some sense. That's not only for charter schools, that would also be for placements in adjacent districts and the like. And I don't know whether, I don't know, just thinking broadly that, if that were to happen, would that be something that would be imposed on the APSEPs as well? And that would be a real problem.
I mean, right now districts don't have to pay for charters, right? I just get worried that now the districts will be responsible for charters, just like we're magnet schools. You know what I mean?
Or for students with IEPs.
With IEP.
They do, yeah.
We do, right?
Yes,
But we don't,
not for,
we're not paying They don't charge us back.
It's the cost of special education above the state reimbursement that they receive from the state. So that's variable and it's the reasonable cost of special education. We
We have to fight with it.
Okay.
That's the argument.
What about, open choice kids?
Right.
Same? Sending district is,
Oh, I know Hartford has a big problem. We have a big problem with that because we get charged 2 different kids, different rates. from the
Oh,
same
yeah.
provider. Like a pair of costs we use, it's usually not a one-on-one, you usually divide it up from 5 or 6. We'll get a charge for the whole pair for one student, like his IEP says 1 hour a day. They're like, but I have to hire a pair, so you gotta pay the whole pair cost.
We did a study, it's 23,000 average per kid outside of our school system versus 19,000 per kid
So
internally.
it's another 4 or 5,000.
Okay, well, you do need to clear the room for another meeting.
pardon me? Yeah, October 10th is the next meeting.
Right, I think that we've done as much damage as we can do today.
Yeah. Actually, yeah.
That's fine.
I love the discussion, right? The discussions are great. It's great to put, new ideas on the table. I thought it was good to hear from the superintendent's perspective as well. Sometimes I realize when I hear others that my experience may not be generalized experience, I was in a very tough district, so it's different.
Now, you'll all be hearing from somebody in my office now, an intern, who will be asking you names of people or groups that we ought to ask to give us statements or give us testimony.
Maybe special ed directors. Special ed directors.
Yeah.
Well, that's one group, obviously.
That would be under, I think.
But there's lots of
Yeah, right.
stakeholders in
There
this
are.
process. And, we want to make sure we get all the wisdom we can.
And it's very simple. I just want them to tell us what recommendations are top priority for them, for the task force to bring forward. That's it. Do you know what I mean? And in the area of funding, services, eligibility, or whatever else they want to think
Right,
about.
right.
It's a very simple kind of thing, just listening to, are we on the right track? I think we are, guys, but I want to hear what they have. So probably need some help with different groups to get that.
Yeah, we'll do that. Yeah.
Well, thank you all very, very much. And we'll see you October 10th. Same place, same time. Hopefully it won't be pouring rain. You're okay right now. Don't jinx it. Thank you for the. Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.